And as the last part of the second edition of the eHealth Investment Forum, we will connect with Boston. We will have a special talk from Robert SCHULTZ, which is the managing director of Mannex. Robert, I don't know if you're here, if you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, can you hear me all right? Perfect.
Yeah, we can hear you. We don't see you yet, but we can hear you.
Wonderful.
Okay, so Robert is a life science entrepreneur, professor, and patient advocate from Boston. As a managing director of Mannex, he uses science diplomacy to help global organizations to align the incentives of the industry, government, academia, and philanthropy. He recently launched the Empathy and AI program offered by Massnex, which provides mentorship, advisory, and insights to early stage companies seeking to make an impact in the United States life science market. So we all hope that this final talk will be helpful for you. Thank you, Robert. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, it's really a pleasure. I always take a lot of pleasure in working with anywhere in Spain. During my undergraduate degree, I lived in Madrid and spent many weekends going back and forth. I probably spent about as much time in Barcelona as I did in Madrid. So I really like working in Boston, excuse me, with entrepreneurs from Spain. And I understand that a large percentage of those happen to be from Catalonia. And so I've always taken a special interest because I think it's an area that it's really, the value is so untapped. The entrepreneurship that's coming from there, I think is very impressive, as you've seen today. But what's tragic being from Boston is to see the failure, right? I think in Spain and Catalonia is no different than anywhere where you're a big fish in a small pond, and you expect to arrive in Boston and be greeted at the airport with a bouquet. It doesn't work that way once you get here. Once you get here, you're in a certain category and you're among the best. But then what? And so that's what I've been studying over the years, because I am fortunate to be surrounded by all of these folks. And so during the day, I also teach entrepreneurship at Babson College, which is the top ranked program in the country. Northeastern, I teach biotech enterprise, mostly working with folks who have clinical backgrounds. This is oftentimes the first business class that they've ever taken. And then also at NYU, I teach healthcare innovation. And I'll tell you more about Massnex later and our approach to how we work collaboratively with the communities that we actually serve. So this might not be news to folks, but the current technology, it's failing us. It's putting the onus, it's putting the burden on patients to do the right thing, to be accountable. And I don't know if anyone else has ever tried to get their grandmother to do something, health-wise, but it's impossible. But we all know that these are tools that can be used. I think what I'm presenting for you today is more or less a philosophy or a vision for how things can be if we use AI in a trustworthy, ethical way, right? And I should have also mentioned that prior to my getting involved in the healthcare industry, I was one of the early employees of Cartera Commerce, which was a loyalty marketing company that used data to provide personalized shopping programs for the credit card industry. So we already have this technology. It's already there. And I'll get into some of the ways that you can actually do this in an authentic way, but also ethically, and make money for the stakeholders who stand to gain from this advanced level of engagement. All right. So the industry, a lot of industry stakeholders are continuing to make money. So what you need to also understand as you're introducing things into the marketplace is there's a certain status quo. And as you're asking people, procurement folks in hospitals, perhaps, to change their buying habits, someone's projections are going to be affected by that. So you have to realize that who you're up against, how that works, the politics work. That's all something that I'll get into in a bit, because I think that you can always work with the folks behind the scenes who in many ways have a lot more influence. And I'll tell you in a bit what that's all about. But doctors, and I'm speaking specifically about clinicians, and for me, I'm a business person. I have an MBA. I've been surrounded by scientists and doctors my whole life, and I'm always very impressed because my brain does not work like that. What I also find tragic is doctors are often treated more like an auto mechanic than like somebody who has the primary trusted relationship with a patient. That's a sacred relationship that, you know, in many ways we're not capitalizing on. And I think one of the panelists earlier said something really astute, which was, you know, basically we're not allowing them to work at the top of their license, to do what they're actually trained to do. Instead, we're asking them to do all these administrative tasks that, yes, they do have a big, you know, role in reimbursement contracts and so forth. But the reality also is that patients don't trust these apps. And I myself went through this firsthand as a caregiver for my father-in-law, who was diagnosed with a brain tumor, like glioblastoma. It's a rare type of brain tumor. And I, being a tech guy, I downloaded, you know, I must have downloaded, you know, a few dozen apps trying to find out what might help us and help us to support us. But it was a lot of technology, but what folks didn't understand is that technology is really the commodity. The empathy, the why becomes the differentiator. And I think as investors, I think what investors want to see is product market fit. And I think if you take a step back from trying to force your, you know, new thing onto the market, if you go and you ask great questions from the community that you serve, it will reveal a lot of insights about the who and the what and everything that you need to know in order to push your idea forward. In fact, many times, what we know in Boston anyway, is that these medical devices or pharmaceutical products or whatever, they rely on the FDA. And if you work with the community that you serve, oftentimes nonprofit organizations, this can be a way to understand what the clinical endpoints are and to sort of understand and have a back channel relationship with the community. So it becomes much easier to push your product and have that be accepted. So this is why you can't get away from policy. You can't get away from the government. And that's a big part of what we do as well here in Boston. So I've been working, you know, across all of these different companies for not just in AI, but AI is something that we've begun doing in the last couple of years. But prior to that, there's been a lot of digital therapeutics companies come through, all kinds of patient monitoring, sensors, all these things that have great technology, but they're not actually considering. And some of these companies even have great business models. They come from Wharton or they come from Harvard Business School or whatever. So they have great business models, but I don't hear about them anymore. And I decided that I needed to start talking about this more openly, about why, when I talk to those same communities, why when I query them, have you heard of this app? Have you heard of that? It's sort of, they either find it confusing or they just, there's this expression, they don't confuse invention with intention. They know they're being sold to. Everyone's trying to sell to them. So really what you have to show, you literally have to show more than everyone else in the world why you're willing to do what it takes to serve them, to help them. And I think most of us don't think about that. We put a lot of effort into understanding, you know, the business side, the inputs there, but we don't think about actually going to the charity walks or the charity rides and really just being open-minded and allowing serendipity to take place, because that authenticity is infectious and they will lead you to the people that you need to know. Okay, during my experience, I've found this to be the case with various diseases. For example, cystic fibrosis is one that I work in. Sickle cell disease is another. These different communities operate in different ways, but they all have a community. Nobody asks to be a member of that community, right? And so, but they have a bond between each other, and they know who the key opinion leaders are. So with that, I just want to tell you, you might have to treat this like a clinician. You know, you have that kind of background maybe, or maybe you do have a business background, but to a family, they look at this problem completely differently. They're suffering, they're in a lot of pain, and nobody is there. They're isolated. And so think about their ecosystem. Who do they trust? Who are those organizations, right? And I think some of those are their friends, their family, the nonprofit maybe that represents that community. They are the mission charter holders for that disease or that condition. But also just remember that for patients and families, innovation is hope. And I think that's something that a lot of communities are even afraid to hope sometimes, because life is so painful for them. So you really do, if you want to be their hero, you really do have to show them and get those people to understand that you are here to help them, and not just in a limited way. They have to see this as a big change. And don't be surprised though if you get bad results that they don't help you, because they don't trust you. So I think it ultimately comes down to that. So I think we've talked about this, but already empathy. This is really something that is missing from business in general. It's missing from the biotech industry. I think it's difficult for me to talk about this because it is like looking a gift horse in the mouth. The biotech industry has been very good to the Boston area, but the reality is that only 14% of clinical trials succeed. It's one of the least trusted industries in the world. I guess the world does trust it a little bit more with COVID to understand the process and how hard it was to spin up some of these vaccines, but it's still not very trusted. And so how do you get your product out there? And I think AI should really be enhancing that human experience. It's not a replacement for real intelligence. I like to say that, I actually prefer real intelligence over artificial intelligence. And in fact, I prefer emotional intelligence even more. And I think if you kind of take a step back and you think holistically about the ecosystem of trust for patients and their families and whoever that stakeholder is that you're trying to get to, I think you'll start to understand data collection opportunities. And so we need to start thinking about AI maybe as a less of a data science and more as a convergence of data science with social science, because we need to reach those people and we need to get their buy-in, and preferably it needs to be their idea. And I'll get to it in a minute how some other industries already are doing this. So there's so many different data-driven opportunities, and there's probably an authentic way that we could systematically kind of do this. And I think what all communities experience is this trauma. Again, they're in this moment of pain. I was in this position. I work in this industry, yet I found it very difficult to operate any technology. I needed help, and nobody was really there. And I think it was very isolating. Your friends would reach out to you and ask you, what can I do? But it sort of became my job to almost like the quarterback of the team to come up with volunteer tasks for them to help me. And I found that to be, isn't there a better way to capitalize on the goodwill? Because I believe, maybe I'm naive, but I believe that there's still so much goodwill out there, so much willingness to help people, but people need something actionable that they can do that resonates with them, so that they feel good about it and they want to do it again and again and again. And I think technology has not found a way to enhance that human experience, because, we had our very small group of people, and if they had influenced us to maybe launch an app in this way or to have some kind of a campaign, maybe we would have launched that on Facebook and that would have spread like wildfire, but it didn't, that's not the way companies are doing it right now. I found the user experience of most of these apps to be quite difficult. And in fact, my father-in-law required the primary, one of them required the primary user to have an account with the app. And I found that to be ridiculous because he couldn't use any technology. He could barely see. He just had a part of his brain removed. And yet this company, how unsympathetic is that? And I think that while the technology is good, we're not enhancing this I think it's obvious that people want to do things to help people when they understand that their loved ones are going through, a difficult time, but we haven't found a way to capitalize on that with technology. And when I'm talking about our what I call the 3 F's, at least for caregiving, I find this to be true. There's 3 F's. It's feelings, emotional support, the functions, literally what people have to do, their daily tasks, the transportation, taking out the trash, etc. And also the finances, because life costs money. You have to pay rent, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay your, kids school, like what, and so when somebody has a traumatic event, more often than not, it affects your work. And so maybe you're not making as much money, and financially you're under even more strain. So again, we aren't understanding maybe some off-the-shelf techniques that have already been out there for years, that make it very easy to engage people in a systematic way, where people knowingly submit and consent to their data being utilized. And also there's the opportunity here to maybe partner with organizations that want to reach those targeted constituencies. And so what I'm talking about also here are ways to align this. And I think some of the panelists alluded to this earlier with, you know, if you're in a payment contract and you need a doctor to make a certain decision that's going to optimize the reimbursement inside of that, perhaps it's a value-based contract, that can be very difficult for that doctor. And that goes back to what I was saying before about treating them like a mechanic and, hey, make sure they're under a microscope, and they're more worried about whether or not they're choosing the right billing codes than actually like spending time, you know, with the patient. And I think we need to think about, you know, allowing them again to operate at the top of their license, because they've taken a Hippocratic oath. They do want to help patients, and they are here to help. But on the other hand, you know, they're experiencing a lot of problems, I would say, especially with EMR systems here in the States. So if there's anything that you can do to make the life of a doctor easier, try to do it. That's the moral of this slide. And I guess going back to the next slide, going back to what I was talking about, all the different opportunities to engage communities. Think about these as, not to sound kind of like sociopathic, but think about these as nodes in a giant distributed network. And all these people have all of their behavioral data, they have their habits, they have their consumer data, they have, you know, where they were, you know, so you can figure out a lot of social determinants out of this. And I guess, you know, you again have to do this in an authentic way, because the data has to, you know, bad data in equals bad decisions out. But you might want to embrace this in a different way than maybe how maybe people look at big data and people look at machine learning and ultimately artificial intelligence. Think about it as what I think one of the panelists earlier said was, think about this as augmented. So you have reality. How do you map reality right now and use it as a predictor for the future? Adherence is the best predictor of a patient's future health. So if there's ways that you can use this data to align and change their behaviors, or to try to alter their behavior in a way that can help to, I don't know, optimize the payment inside of those value-based contracts, then we're not actually using this in a way currently that I'd like to see. Maybe this is a good business idea that nobody's doing, and I just gave it away. I don't know, but there's already an industry that's kind of already doing this, and I think it's kind of interesting that nobody has really thought about this. Maybe because it treads the line of two different industries, one of which is not trusted, and the other which that is trusted even less, and that is the credit card industry. Right. So the reality is that in today's world, we live in a consumer world, and we found that in especially in COVID times, everything can be purchased on the internet. Spain, as of one of the highest, you know, I remember when I was there in 2001, e-commerce was already there, and I came back to Boston, e-commerce wasn't even here as strong. So I know that you were an early adopter of that, and think about all the different opportunities to create integrated wellness malls of all the different services that might be available out there that would support, you know, the ideals of all the different stakeholders, really. So this could be things like shopping support. You could actually queue up targeted offers. I could see in the future, of course, insurance companies are in the business of risk. They want to alleviate risk. And so it might be in their best interest to create a small account that allows them to maybe incentivize cardholders, you know, sorry, I said cardholders, but we're talking about members. So a member of an insurance company might actually get an online digital offer saying, hey, you know, buy this salad, or try to, you know, join the gym and you'll get double rewards or something. You know, the incentives can drive behavior, but we have to remember that our habits are a reaction to like negative thoughts, the bad things about ourselves, and so we become a reflection of our habit, you know, of our habits. And I think in order to change habits is very difficult, and it shifts, as you see from lots of different companies out there, Facebook, etc. But the credit card industry already has this information out there, and working collaboratively with you know, are working to aggregate maybe some of that data with some social data. And I think there's probably something that nobody's done there around understanding, maybe understanding, like, again, going back to the 3 F's of caregiving, you're talking about, transportation. So anyone can have an Uber or a Lyft. This could be a white labeled API that everyone, could have integrated. But again, it's a commodity. Once it's been done, everyone's going to copy it. So the idea though is the underlying why. And what I'm going to start seeing is probably, and there's some elements of, you've seen this online malls where you're shopping for good, and there's certainly that, and that's basically affiliate marketing, but not in a collaborative way here that kind of I guess capitalizes, and again, not to sound sociopathic, on that social connection that families have between one another. All right, and I think, again, going back to this like featured stakeholder that I don't think a lot of people truly understand. Caregivers are just so isolated, and they're everyday heroes for their loved ones. They won't admit that they need help. Maybe they don't need help 9 days out of 10, but on that 10th day, that could be detrimental for the patient. There's a lot of reasons why, data and reaching and supporting a caregiver could be beneficial to any product. But I think some of the opportunities I see, especially in, when I say life science, it could be a medical device, but it could also be a pharma company. And what I've heard was, when a patient drops out of a clinical trial, it could cost between $2 and $5 million per day per patient. So why are we not wrapping the caregivers in a warm blanket and making sure that those patients are retained? And I think it would be money well spent. Again, not just thinking about it from hey, let's give them a small stipend to come to Boston and we'll give them a meal ticket. I'm talking take care of them. Take care of their needs back at home too. Make them understand that they're an important asset in this big process. And I don't see that from the clinical trial industry. Oftentimes they don't even hear back results of it, which is just awful as well. So, but think about these caregivers, because I don't know about you, but when my loved one is going through something, terrible, I'm not exactly going to the supermarket and price comparing. I'm getting what I need and I'm going out. If you made that easier, if you plugged into that Amazonification or whatever you want to call it, I think we'd have something there. And by the way, I think if we could engage patients in the same way that Amazon and Google do, I don't think that we'd have a problem with patient engagement. For some reason, they know something, because there's something about the patient data and the consent and being able to collect that makes it I think very compelling to mix that convergence of consumerism with patient engagement and adherence. There's been some companies that have done some aspects of that out there. Pact was one that did well, I guess, for a little while, where you could, put money into an account to work out. Some people have probably heard of that, and then you have to pay if you didn't work out. But it's not always money. The incentive is not always money. I think the incentive is at the right time, at the right place, that decision support. Wouldn't that be nice? And I don't see that from companies today. All right. The other stakeholder, which I think is even more important, and this is really where my specialty, and I think the nonprofit organizations are the place to be. And there's a very good reason for that. Again, going back to the FDA, these are the organizations that represent the community. Sometimes there's a lot of money flowing around in these diseases, and there might be multiple nonprofits that do different things. So you need to start, asking questions around, where do the key opinion leaders trust? Who are they affiliated with and why? There's often politics. Sometimes some organizations believe in putting research in, and other ones believe more in policy. They're both useful in their own way, but you have to be diplomatic about that. What makes them all similar is that they're all nonprofit organizations. They all revolve around, donations and philanthropy. In the States, it's a very important thing, because without these organizations, many times prior to these organizations existing, there was nobody to advocate for these patients. In the US, it's a zero-sum game. When you have winners, you inherently have losers, and people fall through the cracks every day. So these nonprofit organizations do a very good job, oftentimes run by people with big hearts that are not you know, Harvard Business School, you know, leaders. These are moms and dads and people with big hearts that care. And so ask, you know, how can you be sympathetic to their cause? How can you ultimately help them to fundraise, create more awareness, create more hope? And you know, how does that organization work? Who are the individuals who fund that organization? Who are the big donors? They oftentimes fund hospitals. They fund clinical trial sites. That would be a nice relationship to have, wouldn't it? You know, who is on the board of advisors, the board of directors? You know, who are some of the corporate partners that these nonprofits have, who have already gained the trust, and you might be able to provide or augment some value into what they're already doing. You know, this is all very important to look at, because ultimately, I think it ultimately does come down to working with the patient advocacy organizations. And in my experience, I work a lot with rare diseases. These are vital. They're so critical to gaining the trust of the community, right? This is the work that I'm doing now with Massnex. What we're doing, everyone talks about academia, industry, and government. And this is really the plan that Massachusetts had years ago, was to a big plan from our governor to pour money into the biotech industry, and it obviously paid off. And everyone goes back to this and they harp on academia, industry, and governments, but they don't really think about what makes Boston special underneath the surface. And I'll tell you what it is. It's philanthropy. And where philanthropy comes from is networks, history, people who came here who didn't have anything, who maybe their family worked their way up, they became billionaires, but then somebody was diagnosed with a disease. Well, the hospitals are right here. And if you have the impact and the means to be, you know, the means to be able to do something about something where you have an enlightened self-interest for your nephew or a loved one or a spouse or even yourself, that's really what's happening behind the scenes. And I think what we like to do at Massnex is to help people understand how to work with these organizations, how to gain the trust of these communities, how to ask, you know, better questions. After all, we have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and a mouth, so we need to use them in that proportion and ask better questions that open up what these unknown unknowns are that they didn't even know, because they're not innovators. You're the innovator. That's your job. So we do this in a new type of business development that we call patient-driven business development. And this is a fact-finding, market research, but it's also, you know, pushing your product out there in an ethical way and getting the feedback that you need from the people who actually, you know, you hope it will help. As mentioned before, we also have an AI accelerator. We call the AI and Empathy Accelerator. And I take a special interest in AI because I'm fascinated by it. I know there's so many different cool companies around the world, and I want to be able to work with these companies, because I think another panelist said, don't actually position yourself as an AI company, position yourself as whatever the problem is that you're solving. And I think that was just so on point. And that's kind of the first step is don't pitch yourself as an AI company, pitch yourself as the problem that you're solving. And we help them with that whole branding experience, positioning. One of the companies that we're working with right now, it's called Vitafluence. And they can be found on the net at vitafluence.ai. And they're a wonderful company from Germany that's raising money. They're raising their round right now, coming to the States, and they have a digital biomarker for autism. And I find that just so fascinating because I have a personal connection to autism. And I find, you know, it's going to be difficult unless you know the right people. And so some of these problems that are hard to solve, it comes down to finding the right people who are willing to open up their Rolodex. They're willing to introduce you to the key opinion leader who has a connection to that hospital, right? So, and then besides that, I didn't mention previously, I've also worked in the past with Asade, organizing your innovation tour here as part of your entrepreneurship program. And that's always a pleasure to work with the folks from Spain and be their tour guide around Boston. And so I've started to focus, that was more broadly focused on innovation in general, but I've started doing that more with regards to both hybrid, where it's an online component, but also online programs where I curate the experts from the Boston ecosystem to give you that first-hand insight around how things work here. So that's my presentation. I thank you very much. I use this image here. This is Boston Light. It's the oldest lighthouse in America. And I use this because I always think about the concept and the imagery of a lighthouse, and how we as entrepreneurs have the opportunity to create, to be a lighthouse for these communities. These people are in the dark, and without us, they ultimately, we know what happens. So I really appreciate your time today, and listen, I hope you were entertained. But I find that the most important thing when working with folks from abroad who are coming to the United States is to understand how our investors are thinking about engagement, how they're thinking about risk. And if you're able to show that you already have the trust of the community that you serve, you don't have to come over here to start doing that. You can start doing that now. And I think if you want to have follow-on investment and so on, I think it pays to start as early as possible, because companies, nonprofit organizations, and patient communities, they're very suspicious that you're trying to sell to them. And the longer that you wait, the more put together of a company that you are, and the more you're presuming that you think you know what they need, the more of a contentious relationship that's going to be. However, if you start now and you start asking them good questions, you start tailoring your product, you can build, in effect, vaporware, save a lot of time, save a lot of resources, and have, more or less a user base, which I think is what investors ultimately want to see.
Thank you.
So again, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well,